and welcome back to Bookish Theories. In today's video, we'd like to talk about Tomorrow by Together's The Name Chapter concept trailer, focusing on a little breakdown and analysis of the video to see what it can tell us about this new upcoming era. As it always happens, Tomorrow by Together introduced the concept of their new series with a trailer that marks the beginning of a new story. According to the press release, this time around the series will focus on the theme of youth facing temptation. This is a concept that in the video is presented with the boys diving back into their magical world after being lured in by a creature that wants to control them. Divided between their desire to indulge in this temptation and their wish to resist it, the trailer portrays the boys confronting themselves in an inner battle to solve this dilemma. In this new surreal adventure, Tomorrow by Together will have to decide whether to fall into the temptation of living an eternal youth in their imagination or to rather resist the urge to run away and finally face the reality of adulthood. This is a concept that in many respects connects us right back to their previous works. Back in Runaway, for instance, the boys ran away in the world of their imagination to escape the unsatisfying reality that surrounded them. Back then, this escape was perceived in a positive light because they were still young and their imagination was a useful tool to find comfort and happiness together. This heartwarming message was also delivered in Blue Hour, but at that point, things were already starting to change. Since the boys were growing older, the shadows of reality were starting to catch up, so by the end of the video, the summer of their life evolved into a fall that anticipated their entrance into adulthood. In the Chaos chapter, this first experience in the real world ended up being very traumatic because the dreamers that they once were became young adults who are stressed, broke, disillusioned and depressed. For a brief moment, the heart was melted by a lover who saved them with their light, and like they did when they were children, the boys wanted to run away with them to be together forever. This time, however, reality got in the way because a lover with money problems is a loser in the eyes of society, so they broke up, they willingly lost themselves in a fantasy that made them fall into chaos, and eventually killed the good boy for the bad boy to be born. By the end of the last album, Thursday's child still had far to go, but was actually beginning his path towards healing. In this new installment, however, the desire to lose themselves into that beautiful fantasy is back stronger than ever, so much so that the named chapter will deal with their inner battle with this temptation. In the article published on Weavers, for instance, the author actually compares this process to a metaphorical confrontation with the devil, which in this context is a figure that obviously embodies temptation itself. Now in the video, this devilish desire is represented by an odd entity who appears by opening a window in the sky, and its intention is to lure them away from the reality of adulthood and into a fantasy where they can be forever young. This is a very intriguing invitation made by a very intriguing character, because in their lore the boys have been tormented by an odd cat that keeps calling their name. This is a cosmic entity able to travel from one universe to the next, and in the Star Seekers it seals a pact with Yeonjun's character Eugene that grants him more power in exchange for an unspeakable price. The main difference here is that if the cat's eyes are blue and green, this entity's eyes are orange and purple. At first glance it would seem like they are not the same, but once we invert the image we discover that they are indeed the very same creature. This is also something that Huninkai confirmed in the behind the scenes, so much so that while they were shooting the video, the cat had blue and green eyes like always, meaning that they intentionally inverted the colors in post-production. As of right now we still don't know why that is, but since the cat represents the devil and the devil is a deceitful entity, it's possible that this could be a disguise in order to trick them. Bear in mind, in the video the cat also speaks in reverse, so if we invert both the image and the audio, we go from a creature that we don't know is speaking gibberish to a creature that we do know actually telling them to come closer. Even if they are initially hesitant, the boys eventually accept the cat's invitation, and when they approach the window we can see that a portal opens up in its place. This is the very thing that happened in the concept trailer of the Dream Chapter Magic, but this time the experience is much more unsettling. If back then the wormhole led Yeonjun to swim in the ocean, this time around the tunnel leads him right into the giant hand of the devil. As many people have noticed, the design of both the tunnel and the hand is actually inspired by the movie Coraline, which, as we see in a second, is a very fitting reference. Both Coraline and Tomorrow by Together, for instance, leave their difficult reality to reach another dimension that is seemingly more beautiful and exciting. In both cases they reach this new world using a tunnel or a wormhole, and in both cases they are tempted by an entity that looks very friendly but is actually very evil. On top of that, when the cat is about to swallow Yeonjun, its mouth is full of red mice that can actually be a reference to the other mice that also appear in Coraline. In that story, the other mice are creatures dressed in red that the beldam uses to lure children into the other world, so this reference would would kind of make sense in the context that we see. According to the Weaver's article, however, the red mice in the mouth can also be a reference to Faust. This is the story of a doctor who strikes a deal with the devil in exchange for knowledge and magic, so right off the bat this reference is very relevant because, as I mentioned before, Eugene strikes a deal with the cat in the very same way. In the German version of Faust written by Goethe, for instance, the doctor has an encounter with a witch on Walpurgis night. While the witch is seducing Faust by dancing with him, he actually sees a whole red mouse coming out of her mouth, which quite obviously freaks him out. Much like in the video, however, by this point the damage has already been done because the characters have fallen into temptation and are now under its control. A few moments later, the trailer also references yet another scene from Faust, which is none other than the scene of the potion. In the story, the devil brings Faust to a witch that prepares him a potion, and this potion has the specific goal to make him younger. Referencing this scene means that in the trailer, the creature is literally giving them a youth potion, and this makes sense because, as we already know, their greatest wish is to escape reality together and be young forever in their imagination. Speaking of which, this concept finally brings us to the main inspiration of the video, which is none other than Peter Pan. In the video, the boy's fight with temptation is introduced with a retelling of this popular tale that is arguably even darker than the original. As you probably already know, Peter Pan is the story of a magical boy who doesn't want to grow old. He finds children who are either abandoned or neglected and then convinces them to join him to Neverland, which is a magic island where the children can play forever in a never-ending youth and where growing up is actually against the rules. The premise of the story is already fitting in and of itself, but the trailer actually offers a very interesting twist. You see, even if at the beginning Yeonjun is seen without a shadow, which is something that Peter Pan is actually known for, in the video the boys don't play the role of Peter Pan like you would expect, but rather the role of the darling children who are tempted by Peter to leave reality in order to join him. As Yeonjun is taken by the hand of the devil cat, the voiceover references Peter asking Wendy and her brothers to go with him. Like Yeonjun, Wendy initially refuses. She resists the temptation and finds excuses in order to stay. Soon enough, however, Peter becomes more insistent. He tells her not to worry because he can teach her how to fly high enough to speak to the stars and to ride on the wind's back. And in the same way, the video shows the creature giving Yeonjun a peek of what he can give him. It gives him wings that disappear soon after. It shows him the magic, the night sky, and at that point, both Yeonjun and Wendy give in, which, as I mentioned before, it's symbolized by the red mice in the mouth. In the next scene, Peter begins his flight lessons with the darling children, and this section of the story overlaps with the boys learning to fly with the other cat. This scene is very eerie here, because after being seduced by the temptation of flying, we see that the boys are being controlled like string puppets who are not aware of what's going on. In the narration, the darling children try to fly, but at first they fail. They try jumping from the floor, then from the beds, but they always end up falling until Peter shows them the right way. In the video, this moment overlaps with the creature giving the boys the youth potion I mentioned before, and only then the boys can fly for themselves. As they go up and down and round, the children are happy, and as they leave to go to Neverland, that is, their magic island, we see the star blinking twice. Now in the next section of the video, the boys are portrayed in the sky, seemingly in the process of discovering the magic that the cat gave them access to. The narration explains that Peter told Wendy that the way to Neverland is second to the right and then straight until morning, but even birds with maps could not have found it with these instructions. This is because Peter is an unreliable source of information. He lies, tricks, says anything that comes to mind, so if we compare him to the cat, these lines already foreshadow that it's a creature that should not be trusted. Now, since the cat has been tormenting them since the dream chapter start, we as the audience know that we shouldn't trust it, because that thing has been sketchy since day one. The boys in the story, however, are easily swayed, and that's kind of the point that they're trying to make. They have already fallen into its temptation, and even if at first we see them enjoying the benefits, soon enough things will start to change. As we see the boys flying in the night surrounded by feathers, Peter tells Wendy to close her eyes, take his hand, and follow him to a place without worries where they will never grow old. In the narration, he invites her to leave tomorrow behind so that forever will never end, and this I think is actually very important. For one, the feathers are suspicious because yes, we are talking about flying, but in Peter Pan they don't really need wings in order to do so. At first I thought it could have been a reference to Little White Bird, which is the collection of stories where Peter Pan first appeared, but then I thought it might have been a reference to Hunin Kai because his character Avis belongs to a legendary race of bird people. The white feathers mixed with them being encouraged to leave tomorrow behind, however, eventually reminded me of something else entirely, which is none other than the ending of the Doom's Night. If you remember, at the end of that video, Subin Scatter's soul confronts the dragon, but that in and of itself is not really surprising, because we know that they're meant to do that at some point. What is surprising, however, is that he actually grows wings in order to unleash his power, and as the white feathers fly around, the narration tells us that he wants to save the tomorrow that they will build together. If we compare this goal to what happens in the trailer, it seems that that is exactly what the cat wants to avoid. If the boys are destined to save tomorrow by being together, the cat is essentially tempting them to forget about it, which is why it's so important to resist and potentially remember their name. In the video, for instance, we see that the boys try to keep temptation at bay, because even if they constantly get lost in their imagination, they always try to open their eyes to come back to reality. If you look closely, more than once, the camera focuses on Bongyu opening and closing his eyes. We follow his perspective like we did back in Blue Hour, where Bongyu was the first one to wake up to the realization that their youth was about to end, while simultaneously being the last one to live the fantasy. In the name chapter, the struggle continues, because he and the others are divided between their need to grow up and face reality and their wish to stay young forever by living in their imagination. This conflict is best represented in the next scene, which shows us the boys confronting themselves in a literal maze in the mirror. We see the boys covered in white feathers and their shadow in black feathers hidden behind the mask of their reflection. In this context, we can say that those shadows represent the temptation that they need to fight, and even if at first these two sides are well divided, they quickly start a back and forth that ends up mixing everything together. This is a scene that basically represents the confusion and chaos that they are experiencing. Sometimes the side of reason wins, but other times the temptation to dive into the fantasy takes over once again. This is an inner battle that they're all experiencing together and at the same time, so much so that the members even confront each other in the attempt to find the correct solution. By the end of the scene, a white-feathered Bongyu is facing himself, not the side of him behind the mask. Like in Blue Hour is the last one left, but for the time being he seems to have won his personal battle with temptation. He leaves himself behind and wakes up in a real bedroom surrounded by the others who are already awake. For a brief moment it seems that the boys won against the temptation to lose themselves in their imagination, but soon enough we realize that fantasy actually caught up with them. As the camera pans out, the room begins to tilt forward, all their stuff begins to slide out the door, and we discover that they're actually in a flying room at Blue Hour. As the members look at each other, Subin stands up and goes for the door. Yeonjun follows him, then Bongyu, and eventually Taeyeon. On the wall we can actually see some posters mentioning the name chapter, and on one of them we can also read the words daydream, nightmare, farewell, and lullaby, all of which might actually be important in the near future. After the four boys, Hyuninka is the only one left. Like he did at the end of the trailer for the Dream Chapter Magic, he turns around to face us and then he jumps out to join the others in the sky. As many people have noticed, in the trailer Kai actually jumps at 5:53, which as we know is the exact minute the boys can make the jump to get to Magic Island at Blue Hour. This implies that despite their best efforts, they couldn't resist the temptation to get lost in the fantasy. They tried to fight it, but magic already took over, so they couldn't do anything but jump. In the end, we don't see if the boys were able to fly, or if that attempt ended up being a fall like in the Chaos chapter, so for now the outcome is still open for interpretation. To know how the story will unfold, we'll have to wait and see, but in the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please think about liking and subscribing. As always, thank you so much for watching guys, I'll see you next time, bye bye!